The world had forgotten her name long before the last stone was laid upon her tomb. 2 centuries had passed since the War of the Crimson Eclipse, when vampire legions clashed with human kingdoms in a conflict so devastating that entire civilizations were erased from history's pages. The battlefields had been swallowed by forests, the fortresses crumbled into hills, and the songs of valor faded into whispered myths told by fireside to frighten children. Yet deep beneath the Ashenvale Mountains, in a crypt sealed by blood magic and bound by ancient oaths, she remained, untouched by time, suspended between death and eternity. Her name was Seraphine Nightshade, though few living souls would recognize it now. Once she had been called the Crimson Reaper, the Death Bloom, the war bride of the vampire king Malachar. She was a warrior forged in darkness, a creature of devastating beauty and merciless power. Her legend spoke of battlefields littered with the bodies of those who dared oppose her, of crimson skies that reflected the blood she spilled, of a love so fierce and tragic that even the gods themselves wept at its ending. But legends, like empires, eventually turned to dust. The crypt where Seraphine lay was a cathedral of forgotten grandeur. Massive stone pillars stretched toward vaulted ceilings lost in shadow, their surfaces carved with intricate runes that pulsed with dormant magic. The air hung heavy with the weight of centuries, thick with dust particles that drifted like memories through shafts of pale moonlight filtering down from cracks in the mountain above. Ancient tapestries, now little more than tattered remnants, depicted scenes of war, vampire warriors with wings spread wide, human soldiers with weapons raised, and at the center of it all, a woman with silver hair and eyes like burning coals. Her sarcophagus stood at the heart of the crypt, elevated upon a dais of black marble veined with crimson. It was not a simple coffin but a work of art, carved from a single piece of moonstone that seemed to glow with its own internal light. The lid had been sculpted to depict her likeness, a sleeping warrior, beautiful and terrible, her hands folded across a blade. Inside, Seraphine lay exactly as she had for 200 years. Her body showed no signs of decay, no touch of time's cruel hand. Her skin was pale as fresh snow, flawless and smooth, possessing an otherworldly quality that made her seem more like a statue carved by a master artist than a creature who had once walked and killed and loved. Her hair, white as moonlight with silver undertones, spread around her head like a halo, cascading over the edges of the sarcophagus in rivers of luminous silk. It was impossibly long, untouched by the brittleness that should have claimed it, each strand perfect and pristine. Her face was a study in contradictions, delicate features that spoke of ethereal beauty, yet marked by the faint scars of countless battles. High cheekbones, full lips pressed into a serene line, long lashes resting against her cheeks. But even in repose, there was something dangerous about her, something that whispered of the predator lurking beneath the angel's face. Her armor told the story of her final battle. Black metal forged in vampire furnaces, inlaid with crimson patterns that seemed to move in the dim light, it had been masterwork craftsmanship. But now it bore the marks of that last, terrible fight. Deep gouges across the breastplate, cracks spider webbing through the pauldrons, entire sections missing where weapons had found their mark. The armor clung to her form, revealing the powerful physique of a warrior who had fought for centuries. Her arms, crossed over her chest, were marked with intricate warrior tattoos, ancient vampire sigils that represented the battles she had won, the enemies she had slain, the oaths she had sworn. But most magnificent of all were her wings. They lay folded against her body, extending beyond the confines of the sarcophagus, each massive wing easily spanning 15 feet when unfurled. The membrane was a dark, translucent crimson, veined with black, stretched between elegant bone structures that could have been mistaken for art if they weren't so clearly designed for flight and war. Even folded, they gave her an imposing presence, a reminder that she was not human, had never been human, and was something far more dangerous than any mortal warrior could hope to be. Upon her chest, held in place by hands that had not moved in 2 centuries, lay the sword. It was called Bloodthorn, a blade legendary even among vampire artifacts. The sword was nearly as long as a man was tall, its blade a dark crimson that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The metal had been forged from a fallen star and quenched in the blood of an ancient dragon, or so the legends claimed. Runes ran along its length, glowing with a faint, pulsing light, red as fresh blood, constant as a heartbeat. The crossguard was shaped like twisted thorns, and the pommel held a single ruby the size of a child's fist, within which shadows seemed to move and writhe. The sword was cursed. Bound to Seraphine through blood magic and ancient rites, it was said that whoever touched the blade besides its true wielder would suffer a fate worse than death. The curse had been laid by Seraphine herself in the moments before she entered her sleep, a final act of defiance to ensure that no one could use her weapon, her power, for purposes she had not sanctioned. For 200 years the crypt had remained sealed, hidden, forgotten. The entrance had been buried beneath a mountain avalanche, the location lost to maps and memory. Occasionally, treasure hunters would stumble upon hints of its existence. A fragment of a journal, a partial map, whispered tales from isolated mountain villages. Most dismissed it as myth. A few brave or foolish souls attempted to find it and never returned, their bodies claimed by the treacherous mountain passes or the dark things that dwelled in the deep places of the world. But time is a patient force, and eventually, all secrets come to light. Nathaniel Cross had never believed in vampires. He was a scholar, a historian specializing in the War of the Crimson Eclipse, a conflict that most of his colleagues considered barely worth studying. The war had ended in stalemate and exhaustion, with both sides retreating to lick their wounds, eventually leading to the peace that had lasted 2 centuries. Oh, there were stories of vampires, beautiful monsters with wings and fangs who drank blood and commanded dark magic. But Nathaniel had always assumed they were exaggerations, folklore born from the chaos of war, human enemies demonized into literal demons by terrified soldiers. He was 32 years old, tall and lean, with the build of someone who spent more time in libraries than training yards. His dark hair was perpetually disheveled, his green eyes bright with curiosity and intelligence. He wore practical traveling clothes now, sturdy boots, leather pants, a worn jacket, all covered in the dust of his journey. His pack contained notebooks, pencils, measuring tools, and a journal filled with years of research. That research had led him here, to the Ashenvale Mountains, following a trail of clues that would have made most historians laugh. An ancient journal fragment he'd discovered in a monastery, a cryptic reference in a soldier's memoir, geological surveys that showed anomalous cavern systems beneath this specific peak. Against all odds and the advice of everyone he knew, Nathaniel had mounted an expedition. The expedition had not gone well. His hired guides had abandoned him after the first serious rockslide. His supplies had dwindled. He'd gotten lost 3 times, each time certain he would die alone on this cursed mountain. But stubbornness, or perhaps fate, had carried him forward. And then, on what would have been his last day before turning back, he'd found it. The entrance was revealed by a recent earthquake, the rubble that had sealed it for 2 centuries finally loosened enough for a determined person to squeeze through. Nathaniel had spent hours clearing the opening, his hands bleeding, his muscles screaming, driven by a certainty he couldn't explain. And when he'd finally crawled through into the passage beyond, when he'd lit his lantern and seen the carved walls and the stairway descending into darkness, he'd known. He'd found it. The lost crypt. The tomb of legends. Now, standing in the heart of that crypt with his lantern held high, Nathaniel could barely breathe. The chamber was far more magnificent than he'd imagined. The architecture alone was worth the entire journey, the carvings, the preservation, the sheer scale of it. This was a discovery that would rewrite historical understanding of the period, prove that vampire civilization had been far more advanced than anyone believed. His mind was already racing with implications, with the papers he would write, the recognition this would bring. But all of that fled from his mind when his lantern light fell upon the sarcophagus, and upon the figure within. Nathaniel approached slowly, drawn forward as if by invisible strings. His rational mind was screaming at him that this was impossible, that bodies didn't look like this after 2 centuries, that everything about this was wrong. But his eyes couldn't deny what they were seeing. She was real. And she was magnificent. He'd seen artistic depictions of vampire warriors, of course, in old texts and crumbling murals. But nothing had prepared him for the reality. The sheer physical presence of her, even in sleep, was overwhelming. This was a creature designed for war, for flight, for killing. Every line of her body spoke of deadly grace and terrible power. Yet she was also hauntingly beautiful. Nathaniel found himself walking around the sarcophagus, observing from every angle, his scholar's mind cataloging details while some deeper part of him simply stared in awe. The wings particularly fascinated him. He'd always assumed the accounts of vampire flight were metaphorical, but here was the evidence. Actual physical wings. How did the biology work? How could they generate enough lift? What evolutionary path would lead to? He caught himself. He was treating this like an academic exercise when he was standing in front of what might be the most significant archaeological discovery in a century. His gaze fell upon the sword. Bloodthorn. He recognized it from descriptions and texts, though most scholars had dismissed it as legendary. But here it was real, resting on her chest with her pale hands folded over the hilt. The runes along the blade pulsed gently, hypnotically, like a heartbeat. Like the sword was alive. Nathaniel knew he shouldn't touch it. Every instinct screamed warning. The legends all spoke of curses, of terrible fates awaiting those who disturbed vampire artifacts. But those were just stories, weren't they? Superstitions born from ignorance and fear. And even if there was some truth to them, he couldn't just leave it. This sword was a historical artifact of immense value. It needed to be documented, studied, preserved. He would be careful, respectful, but he had to at least examine it. He set his lantern down on the edge of the sarcophagus, the light casting dancing shadows across Seraphine's still face. He pulled out his journal, making a quick sketch of the sword's position, noting the runes, documenting everything properly as a good scholar should. Then, with trembling fingers, Nathaniel reached out and gently gripped the blade. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The moment his skin made contact with the crimson metal, the runes exploded with light. The entire sword blazed brilliant red, bright enough to blind, and Nathaniel felt energy surge up his arm like lightning, burning, freezing, alien and terrible. He tried to jerk his hand back but couldn't move, couldn't let go, paralyzed by the force flowing through him. The crypt itself seemed to scream. The dormant runes carved into every wall, every pillar, every stone surface suddenly ignited with the same crimson light. The air itself began to vibrate with power, a deep thrumming that Nathaniel felt in his bones. Stone dust rained down from above as the ancient structure shuddered. And beneath his hand he felt the sword wake. It wasn't just an object anymore. It was aware, conscious, and it was furious. Before Nathaniel could process this impossible realization, the sword's power erupted outward in a wave of pure crimson energy. The blast threw him backward, sending him tumbling across the stone floor. His lantern shattered, but it didn't matter. The entire crypt was now awash in red light from the glowing runes and the sword that blazed like a captured star. Nathaniel scrambled to his knees, his heart pounding, terror and exhilaration mixing in his veins. He triggered something, awakened something, and every survival instinct he possessed was telling him to run. But he couldn't look away from the sarcophagus. Because Seraphine was moving. It started with her fingers. They twitched, just slightly, then curled around the sword's hilt with sudden, deliberate strength. Her chest rose as she drew in a breath, the first breath in 200 years, and the sound was like wind through a graveyard. The massive wings began to tremble, the membrane rippling as ancient muscles remembered how to move. Then her eyes opened. They glowed. Brilliant, burning crimson, like coals pulled from the heart of a forge. There was no white to them, no iris, just that terrible red radiance that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone to see the soul beneath. They were the eyes of a predator, ancient and powerful and utterly inhuman. And they were looking directly at Nathaniel. Seraphine's lips parted, revealing fangs, long, elegant, impossibly sharp. A sound emerged from her throat, something between a hiss and a growl vibrating with power that made the air itself shiver. Her hair began to lift and float around her head as if caught in an invisible wind, each strand moving independently, crackling with static energy. She sat up. The movement was fluid, inhumanly graceful, showing no sign of stiffness or weakness despite 2 centuries of sleep. The wings unfurled partially, spreading wider, and Nathaniel could see the membrane was perfect, undamaged, as if she'd only been sleeping for a night instead of 200 years. The armor, cracked as it was, seemed to resonate with her power, the crimson inlays glowing brighter. Seraphine's gaze never left Nathaniel. She tilted her head, studying him with those burning eyes, and he felt like a mouse being observed by a hawk. There was intelligence there, yes, but also hunger. And beneath it all, confusion, the look of someone waking from a dream they couldn't quite remember. Who? Her voice was like silk over steel, accented in a way that hadn't been heard in centuries. Dares disturb my rest? Nathaniel tried to speak but found his throat had gone completely dry. He was still on his knees, frozen in place, unable to move even though every cell in his body was screaming at him to flee. This was a vampire. A real vampire. The legends were true, and he'd just awakened one of the deadliest warriors in history. What had he done? Seraphine rose from the sarcophagus in a single fluid motion, bloodthorn in her hand, the blade singing as it cut through the air. Her wings spread fully now, massive and terrible, blocking out the light from the glowing runes. She was tall, nearly 6.5 feet, and every inch of her radiated lethal grace and ancient power. Stone dust swirled around her feet as she stepped onto the floor of the crypt for the first time in 200 years. She took a step toward Nathaniel. Then another. Each footfall echoed through the chamber like a death knell. The sword in her hand pulsed with light and rhythm with her steps, and Nathaniel could feel its hunger, its desire for blood, for violence, for the purpose it had been created to serve. You touched Bloodthorn, Seraphine said, her voice gaining strength with each word, losing the rasp of disuse. You triggered the awakening curse. Do you have any idea what you've done, mortal? Nathaniel finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'm a historian. I was just a historian. The word seemed to puzzle her. She stopped a few feet away, close enough that Nathaniel could see the intricate details of her warrior markings, could smell something like cinnamon and copper emanating from her. You are human. It wasn't a question, but Nathaniel nodded anyway. Something flickered in those crimson eyes. Surprise? Confusion? A human touched my blade. Willingly. Without coercion. She was speaking more to herself now, working through something. The curse should have killed you instantly. Should have torn your soul from your body and trapped it in eternal torment. It didn't, Nathaniel managed, finding a bit more courage now that he wasn't immediately dead. I felt the power, but it didn't kill me. Seraphine stared at him for a long moment, and Nathaniel watched as emotions flickered across her face. Emotions he wouldn't have expected from a legendary vampire warrior. Confusion. Wonder. And beneath it all, something that looked almost like pain. That's impossible, she whispered. Unless, she looked down at Bloodthorn, at the runes still glowing along its length, then back at Nathaniel. How long has it been? Since I slept. 200 years, Nathaniel said. The war ended in stalemate. Both sides retreated. There's been peace since. Peace? The word seemed to strike her like a physical blow. She took a step backward, her wings drooping slightly. 200 years? That can't be. The war was everything, it consumed the entire world. You can't just have peace after? She cut herself off, shaking her head as if to clear it. Nathaniel watched as the legendary war bride struggled with information that contradicted everything she'd known. Despite his fear, despite the very real danger he was in, his historian's curiosity was stirring. This was a living witness to events he'd spent years studying. She could answer questions that no text, no artifact ever could. If she didn't kill him first. I need to see, Seraphine said suddenly. She turned those burning eyes back on him. I need to see the world. To understand what has happened. 200 years. She seemed to test the words, finding them foreign and impossible. I can show you, Nathaniel heard himself saying before his rational mind could stop him. I can explain what's happened, how the world has changed. I know the history I've studied. Why? The question cut through his words like a blade. Why would you help me? You know what I am. What I was. I killed hundreds of your kind. Thousands. I was a weapon aimed at humanity's heart, and I never missed. There was something in her voice now, not quite regret but perhaps acknowledgement. You should run from me. Or try to kill me. Those would be the rational responses. Nathaniel slowly pushed himself to his feet, his legs trembling but holding. Running wouldn't do much good, would it? You have wings. And I'm not a warrior, I wouldn't last 5 seconds trying to fight you. A hint of a smile touched her lips, revealing the tips of those deadly fangs. True. Besides, Nathaniel continued, emboldened by the fact that he was still alive, you just said yourself that I should be dead. That the curse should have killed me. But it didn't. That means something, doesn't it? There's a reason why I could touch your sword when no one else could. Seraphine regarded him with those ancient, inhuman eyes. Perhaps, she said slowly. Or perhaps the curse has simply weakened over time. Perhaps you are merely lucky. Maybe, Nathaniel agreed. But don't you want to know? Aren't you curious? That got through to her. He saw it in the way her posture shifted, the way the glow in her eyes flickered. Curiosity was, perhaps, a universal trait, transcending the boundaries between human and vampire. What is your name, human? She asked. Nathaniel Cross. Nathaniel. She tested the name, her accent making it sound exotic and strange. I am Seraphine Nightshade, though you likely knew that already if you came seeking this place. She gestured around the crypt with Bloodthorn. This is my tomb. Was my tomb. I'm no longer certain what it is now. A historical site, Nathaniel suggested, and was rewarded with a sharp laugh from Seraphine. How very practical. She looked around the chamber at the glowing runes, the ancient carvings, the remnants of her civilization. I went to sleep believing the war would continue without me. Believing my king would avenge my fall and drive humanity into extinction. Instead, I wake to learn it all ended. That peace came. She sounded lost, adrift. What purpose does a war bride serve in a time of peace? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Nathaniel realized that for all her power, for all her deadly nature, Seraphine was as displaced and confused as someone could be. She'd been a weapon, forged and honed for a specific purpose, and that purpose no longer existed. I don't know, Nathaniel said honestly. But maybe that's something we can figure out together. Seraphine looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression softened, just barely but enough to notice. You are very strange, Nathaniel Cross. Brave or foolish, I cannot yet determine which. Probably both, he admitted. Another of those ghost smiles touched her lips. Then she turned, surveying the crypt one more time, her wings folding partway against her back. Very well, historian. Show me what has become of the world I knew. But be warned, if this is some trick, if you are leading me into a trap, I will paint the mountainside with your blood. Understood, Nathaniel said, though his heart was racing. And for what it's worth, I have no trap waiting. I came here alone and no one knows I found this place. Then you are even more foolish than I thought, Seraphine said, but there was no malice in it. She moved toward the entrance of the crypt with that supernatural grace, then paused and looked back at him. Come then, Nathaniel Cross. Let us see what manner of peace you humans have built upon the ashes of war. Nathaniel hurried to gather his things, his mind reeling. He'd come seeking historical artifacts and knowledge. Instead, he was leaving with a living legend, a vampire war bride who could probably level a small army single-handedly if she chose. This was either the greatest discovery in human history or the biggest mistake anyone had ever made. Possibly both. The journey down the mountain was unlike anything Nathaniel had experienced. Seraphine moved through the darkness with perfect ease, her eyes providing all the light she needed, her vampiric senses reading the mountain trails as easily as Nathaniel would read a book. She kept her wings folded tight against her back to navigate the narrower passages, but more than once she simply took flight, her massive wings catching the wind and carrying her effortlessly over obstacles that would have taken Nathaniel hours to circumvent. The first time she flew, Nathaniel stopped in his tracks, watching in pure awe as she rose into the air with 3 powerful beats of those crimson wings. She hovered above the trail, her hair whipping around her in the mountain wind, her armor glinting in the moonlight. For a moment she looked like something from a painting, a dark angel surveying the mortal world below. Then she descended, landing beside him with barely a sound despite her size and the weight of her armor. "You move very slowly," she observed. "I don't have wings," Nathaniel pointed out. She tilted her head, considering. "This is true." Then, before he could protest, she reached out and lifted him, simply picked him up as if he weighed nothing at all, and took flight. Nathaniel barely had time to yelp before they were airborne, rising swiftly over the mountain trail. He clutched at her instinctively, feeling the hard edges of her armor under his hands, feeling the incredible strength in the arms that held him. The wind rushed past his face, cold and sharp as a Shenvale mountain spread out beneath them in the moonlight. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Seraphine carried him for several miles before setting him down on a wider section of trail. She was breathing slightly harder from the exertion, and Nathaniel realized that despite her power, she was still recovering from 2 centuries of sleep. The flight had taxed her. "Thank you," he managed, his legs shaking as he found solid ground again. "You're welcome," she replied, sounding faintly amused by his fear. "But we need to rest. I am not at full strength." They found a sheltered overhang and stopped for the night. Nathaniel built a small fire, more for his own comfort than any practical need, since Seraphine could see perfectly in the dark. She sat across from him, bloodthorn laid across her lap, her wings creating a dramatic silhouette against the stone wall behind her. "Tell me about the peace," she said. "How did it come to be?" So Nathaniel told her. He explained how both sides had exhausted themselves, how the vampire king Malachar had withdrawn his forces after a final, catastrophic battle at Crimson Ridge. How human kingdoms, equally devastated, had been unable to pursue. How diplomats from both sides had eventually met under banners of truce, establishing borders and terms that neither side loved but both could accept. The vampires retreated to the Nocturne territories in the far north, Nathaniel explained. They built a new civilization there, one based on coexistence with willing human blood donors rather than conquest. There's trade now even. Cultural exchange. Seraphine listened with an expression that cycled between disbelief and something that might have been grief. Malachar agreed to this? My king, who swore he would burn every human city to ash. He did. Though from what I understand he became different after the war. Withdrawn. Some accounts say he was never the same after. Nathaniel hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. After I fell, Seraphine finished. Her voice was quiet. He loved me, you know. In his way. As much as a creature like him could love anything. I was his war bride, yes, but also his companion. His equal on the battlefield if not in power. She stared into the fire. I wonder if he mourned me. The records suggest he did, Nathaniel said gently. There's an account of him carrying your body from the battlefield himself, refusing to let anyone else touch you. He's the one who built this crypt, who laid you to rest with Bloodthorn. The sealing rituals alone must have cost him enormously in terms of power. A single tear traced down Seraphine's pale cheek, glinting like a diamond in the firelight. He let me go, she whispered. I told him to. In my final moments, I begged him to end the war, to find peace. I was so tired, Nathaniel. So tired of killing, of the endless cycle of violence. But I never thought he would actually listen. Nathaniel said nothing, giving her space to process 2 centuries of grief and loss in a single night. I need to see him, Seraphine said suddenly, looking up. I need to see Malachar to know if he's truly changed. To understand what this new world is. That might be complicated, Nathaniel said carefully. The Nocturne territories don't exactly welcome human visitors, and if you show up after 200 years, they'll think I'm a ghost or an imposter, Seraphine finished. She nodded slowly. You're right. I need to understand this world first, learn how it works before I reveal myself. Her crimson gaze fixed on him. Which means I need you, historian. You'll be my guide, my teacher in this strange new peace. I'll help however I can, Nathaniel promised, wondering what exactly he was getting himself into. They traveled together for weeks after that, making their way through the mountains and into the lowlands. Nathaniel showed Seraphine the world that had grown from the ashes of war. They visited human villages where people lived without fear of vampire raids, where children played in streets that had once run red with blood. They saw trade caravans moving freely across lands that had been contested borders, saw mixed communities where humans and vampires lived in cautious but functional proximity. Seraphine absorbed it all with a mixture of wonder and discomfort. This was not the world she'd known. The hatred and fear that had defined her entire existence had faded to wary coexistence, to practical cooperation. It was better, objectively, but it also made her feel obsolete. She was a weapon designed for a war that no longer existed. But she was also changing. Nathaniel watched it happen gradually. The hard edges of the war bride softened as she interacted with the world. She learned to fold her wings in ways that made her less intimidating, to dim the glow in her eyes so she could pass for one of the modern vampires if seen from a distance. She asked endless questions about everything: agriculture, architecture, art, literature. She was particularly fascinated by the music, by instruments and styles that had been developed during her 200-year sleep. And somewhere along the way, without either of them quite realizing when it happened, their relationship shifted. It started with small things. The way Seraphine would instinctively position herself between Nathaniel and perceived threats. The way Nathaniel began to read to her at night, sharing stories and histories that she devoured with enthusiasm. The comfortable silences that grew between them, requiring no words. They were camping beside a river one evening, several months into their journey, when Nathaniel finally acknowledged the truth he'd been avoiding. "I've been thinking," he said, watching Seraphine as she sat at the water's edge, her wings spread to catch the last rays of sunset. "About why the curse didn't kill me. About why I could touch Bloodthorn. And?" Seraphine didn't turn, but he could hear the interest in her voice. "The curse was designed to kill anyone with hostile intent, wasn't it? Anyone who tried to steal the sword or use it against you." "Yes. But I had no hostile intent. I was curious, foolish but not malicious. Maybe that's why it didn't trigger." He paused. "Or maybe it recognized something else. Something neither of us understood at the time." Now she did turn, her crimson eyes finding his. "What are you saying, Nathaniel?" He met her gaze steadily. "I'm saying that I've spent the last several months traveling with someone who could kill me as easily as breathing, and not once have I been afraid. I'm saying that when I look at you, I don't see a monster or a weapon. I see someone brilliant and fierce and more alive than anyone I've ever known." He took a breath. "I'm saying that I think I'm falling in love with you, Seraphine. And I think maybe, just maybe, the sword knew that before either of us did." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the river seemed to quiet its rushing. Then Seraphine rose, her wings spreading wide, and crossed the distance between them in 3 graceful strides. She knelt before him, bringing her face level with his, and for a moment Nathaniel thought he'd made a terrible mistake. "You are a fool," she said softly, but her eyes were bright with tears. "A complete and utter fool. I am a vampire, Nathaniel. A killer. I have ended so many lives I cannot count them. My hands are stained with blood that will never wash clean." "I know what you were," Nathaniel replied. "But I also know who you are. And I know what you're becoming." "What am I becoming?" she whispered. "Someone who chooses peace over war. Someone who protects rather than destroys. Someone who reads poetry under the stars and laughs at my terrible jokes." He reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and gently touched her face. "You're becoming yourself, Seraphine. Not a war bride. Not a weapon. Just you." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "This is impossible," she breathed. "Humans and vampires don't, we can't." "We can," Nathaniel said. "If we choose to. If we're brave enough to try." When she kissed him, it was with infinite gentleness, mindful of her fangs, careful not to hurt him. It was a kiss that spoke of new beginnings, of choices that defied history, of love that transcended the boundaries that should have divided them. It was also the beginning of something that would reshape both their worlds. They eventually made their way to the Nocturne territories, to the glittering vampire capital of Shadow's End. The city was nothing like what Seraphine remembered. Instead of a military fortress, it had become a place of dark beauty, soaring spires of black glass, streets lit by bioluminescent crystals, gardens where night-blooming flowers created a riot of color against the perpetual twilight. And at its heart, in the palace that had once been a war command center, Malachar awaited. The Vampire King had indeed changed. He was still powerful, still commanding, but there was a weariness to him now, a heaviness that spoke of long years and longer regrets. When Seraphine and Nathaniel were brought before him, when he looked up and saw her standing there alive after 2 centuries, the mask of royal composure shattered. Seraphine. Her name on his lips was a prayer, a curse, a sob. He rose from his throne, his own wings spreading wide, and for a moment Nathaniel thought there would be violence. Instead Malachar wept. "I tried to let you rest," the Vampire King said, his voice breaking. "I honored your final wish. I ended the war. I built the peace you begged for with your dying breath. But every day for 200 years I have mourned you. Every single day." "Then your mourning can end," Seraphine said gently. She approached him, ignoring the guards who tensed at her movement, and took his hands in hers. "Because I am here, Malachar. And I am so proud of you. So proud of what you've built, of the peace you've maintained. You honored me in the best way possible, not by continuing to kill in my name, but by choosing the path I would have wanted." They talked for hours, Seraphine and her former king, grieving together for what was lost, celebrating what had been built in the aftermath. And when she finally introduced Nathaniel, when she explained what he meant to her, Malachar looked at the human scholar with eyes that held both sadness and understanding. "You are braver than I ever was," Malachar said to Nathaniel. "To love a vampire warrior, to see past the blood and the violence to the person beneath. Guard her well, human. She is more precious than you can possibly know." "I know exactly how precious she is," Nathaniel replied, and Seraphine's hand found his. In the months and years that followed, Seraphine became a symbol of something new, a bridge between the past and the present, between vampire and human, between war and peace. She took on a new role, not as a weapon but as an ambassador, working to strengthen the bonds between species, to ensure that the peace her sacrifice had helped create would endure. She and Nathaniel built a life together that defied every expectation and challenged every assumption. They faced opposition, certainly, from humans who couldn't forget the war, from vampires who saw their union as a betrayal. But they also found support from unexpected places, from those who saw in their relationship the promise of a better future. Bloodthorn, the cursed blade, remained Seraphine's constant companion. But it was no longer a weapon of war. She had it reforged, the curse lifted, the runes changed. It became a symbol of protection instead of destruction, a reminder of what she had been and what she had chosen to become. On a clear night 5 years after her awakening, Seraphine and Nathaniel stood together on a balcony overlooking Shadow's End. The city sprawled below them, a testament to the peace that had seemed impossible 2 centuries ago. Seraphine's wings were spread wide, catching the gentle wind, and Nathaniel stood within the circle of her arm, her wing curving protectively around him. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathaniel asked. "Waking up? Everything that came after?" Seraphine considered the question seriously, as she considered all things. "I regret the lives I took," she said finally. "I regret the years of violence, the pain I caused. Those regrets will never leave me, and they shouldn't. They're part of who I am, part of my history." She pulled him closer, her chin resting on top of his head. "But do I regret waking up? Do I regret meeting you, falling in love with you, building this life? Never. Not for a single moment. You gave me something I never had before, Nathaniel. You gave me a purpose beyond war. You gave me peace. You gave me the same," he said softly. "And so much more." They stood together as the night deepened, as the stars emerged above the city, as the world they had helped reshape continued to turn. 2 unlikely souls, a human scholar and a vampire war bride, who had found in each other something neither had known they were searching for. Well, hope. A future worth living. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, Seraphine would think back to that crypt, to the 200 years of darkness, and she would feel grateful. Grateful that she had slept through the worst of the pain, grateful that she had awakened to find the world transformed, but most of all, grateful for the curious, foolish, brave human who had touched her sword and changed everything. Some stories end in tragedy. Some end in triumph. But the best stories, the ones worth remembering, worth telling around fires and writing in books and passing down through generations, those stories end with two people standing together against the darkness, choosing each other, choosing hope, choosing to believe that even the deadliest warrior can find peace. Even the war bride, who slept for 200 years, can wake to find love waiting on the other side of nightmare. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful magic of all. In the years that followed, Seraphine and Nathaniel's story became legend in its own right. Not a legend of war and bloodshed, but one of transformation and redemption. It was told as proof that the past need not define the future, that even those forged as weapons can choose to become something else, that love can bridge the deepest divides. Their children, born through magic that defied nature itself, hybrids of vampire and human, became the first of a new generation, one that carried the strengths of both species and the hatred of neither. They would go on to shape the world in ways their parents could only imagine, ensuring that the peace won at such terrible cost would endure. But that is another story for another time. This story, the story of how a human scholar awakened a vampire war bride and changed the course of history, ends where all the best stories do, with hope, with love, and with the promise that even in the darkest night, dawn will eventually come. Sometimes we just need someone brave enough to reach out their hand and help us wake up to greet it.